Hello, my name is Maddie Free, and I will be talking about sensory diets. First, what is a sensory diet? This term was developed by Patricia Wallbarger, who is an occupational therapist, and she defines it as a personalized activity plan that provides the sensory input a person needs to stay focused and organized throughout the day. So something that's cool about sensory diets is really we all use some sort of sensory diet day to day, perhaps without even really thinking about it. Maybe that's something as simple as jiggling our leg or chewing gum to stay focused while we're working at our desk. Or after being in front of our computer all day, we'll get out to go for a walk. Or some people like to stay active by working out in the mornings or the evenings. Those are all examples of how we seek out sensory input to kind of keep our systems in balance without maybe even consciously doing that on purpose. And so something that sensory diets really emphasize is incorporating it into daily routines that already exist and finding the just right state, meaning that kids who maybe need more sensory input could benefit from a sensory diet, but also kids who maybe need less. So it's really individualizing it to meet that person's needs. So what does sensory processing have to do with communication? Well, as speech language pathologists, we talk a lot about how the central nervous system and the sensory system really provides the foundation for everything else related to communication. And so if our sensory needs aren't being met, then it kind of throws off this whole interconnected process of communication. And I just want to point out too that as a speech language pathologist, it is not in our scope of practice to officially prescribe a sensory diet. That would be the role of the occupational therapist. However, with the proper training and education, sensory diets can really be incorporated anywhere by a caretaker or parent or integrated into other therapy activities with people and professionals like SLPs. So I'll talk a little bit about the relevance of sensory diets to autism spectrum disorder. A study done in 2011 found that over 96% of children with ASD report hyper and hyposensitivities in multiple domains. So that is obviously a very high percentage. That means that a majority of children with autism have some sort of sensory need across multiple environments. So it's very relevant to autism spectrum disorder. Another study done in 2015 found that sensory-based intervention, especially tactile, in this case, it was massage therapy, was effective in reducing negative behaviors. So another thing that we talk about as SLPs a lot is that negative behaviors are a way of communicating. And so when those behaviors happen, these kids are trying to tell us something that they can't tell us otherwise. And often it is that something in their sensory system is off. And so by addressing those sensory needs, we can reduce those negative behaviors that we don't want to see. So these are just some examples of activities that you could implement, again, at home, really anywhere, for the different senses. And so of course we have 7 different senses with our body: olfactory being smell, tactile being touch, vestibular is anything to do with movement, visual of course is sight, proprioception is sensing where our body is at in space. And then gustatory would be eating or oral motor, digestive, taste, and then auditory would be hearing. So some activities that you could try for proprioceptive, so where your body is at in space, the child could push against the wall, or you could give them a big bear hug. Oral motor would be that eating piece, so you could be eating chewy, crunchy foods. Tactile or touch, you could play with textured materials such as shaving cream or Play-Doh to get input that way. Vestibular could be anything to do with movement, such as swinging or riding bike, anything else that has to do with movement. And another thing I found interesting was that for kiddos who maybe need more alerting stimuli, that could be drinking cold water or listening to fast music. That would be important to consult an occupational therapist before implementing something like that, just to make sure that they truly are understimulated and not just in a shutdown state. So some signs for understimulation would be lethargic or falling asleep, slumped posture, decreased attention, slow moving, decreased ability to follow directions, and a drooling, continual drooling / open mouth posture. So those are just some signs that if you were to see that in your child, you would want to consult an occupational therapist and figure out some ways to address that. These are some additional resources. When I was researching for information about sensory diets, I found a lot online. There's tons of ideas on Pinterest, and there's multiple blogs created by occupational therapists with lots of ideas. This one in particular I found it's called yourkidstable.com. It was created by an occupational therapist, and she had 100 plus sensory diet ideas. So the possibilities are really endless, and the odds of you finding something that works for your child, they're pretty high. So this resource talks more about sensory integration and kind of how that process works. The third one there is more about sensory diets in general. And the last one is, again, more examples of activities that you could implement to address some of those senses. This is a sensory diet template I found on the same blog, Your Kids Table, developed by an occupational therapist. I just thought this was a really practical, useful way to implement a sensory diet. And so what she does is she breaks this up into 4 different categories. The first being the daily activity that you're addressing. And so oftentimes that's like a transition time between activities, or maybe getting ready for the day, the bedtime routine. And then the second column is the challenge. So what is presenting the problem that's hindering the child from completing this activity? And then the third column is the sensory activity that you can try to implement to address that problem. And the last column is, was it helpful or was it not helpful? So just to give an example, one of the daily activities on here is going to school. And the challenge is the child is anxious about going. So maybe they're refusing to get ready for the day and get out the door. Some sensory activities that you could try to implement to address that would be giving big hugs, squeezing ball and pocket, or having the supplies organized the night before. I really like that last one because many children with autism are very routine oriented. So I think having supplies ready the night before, maybe picking out their outfit the night before, could really help ease that anxiety about going to school. And then of course, the last column is just a really practical, organized way that you can keep track of, was this activity that I tried helpful or was it not? And if it wasn't, then you can adjust as needed. And these are my references. So as I said, there's a lot of resources out there. The odds of you finding something that works for your child is high. And so I hope that this information was helpful. Thank you.